Hi, this is Linda Hitt. We're going to take a look at the time value of money in terms of what businesses probably need. Some of the applications may be beyond that. And we're going to sort of focus in on different types of present value calculations and examples, and also future value, looking at annuity as well as one sum brought forward or backwards. So first of all, why do we need to even deal with time value of money? What's the importance of having to know something about it? Um, Actually, it kind of makes sense in many ways. For most of us, you'd rather get a dollar today than a dollar 10 years from now. We know the purchasing power of a dollar is not going to be the same every year due to inflationary factors. There's a certain amount of risk having to wait. Maybe you win the lottery and maybe 10 years from now they're no longer awarding money from the lottery. And if there's an opportunity cost, if you have to wait, you don't have that money to spend or do something else with. So for many reasons, we need to look at the timing of cash flows. Certain things on our financial reports, on the income statement and the balance sheet, have valuations or numbers calculated using those kinds of concepts. For example, if our assets are impaired, like property, plant, equipment, often the way we value the asset at its new written down amount is to look at future cash flows and to look at the present value of those future cash flows. We can value our liabilities in terms of current value, though apparently many companies don't. But there are some things that we deal with in terms of present value, particularly sometimes future value. All businesses will probably at some point have to take out a loan, maybe lease a car, maybe hopefully invest some of their money while they don't need it for other purposes. And so all these things certainly deal with present value concepts for the most part, or future value. The term discounting deals with the idea of using present value, so taking future cash flows, kind of pulling out the interest, so the thing that you're having to wait for, and bringing it back to the present. What is it worth today, right now, to receive a series of future cash flows? Compounding, on the other hand, goes the other way. You're looking at putting money in now. What is it worth to you in the future? And again, we'll looking at different examples in our problems. Types of interest, we will mostly, in fact, we are completely going to look at compound interest. Simple interest, you never earn interest on interest. You take your original principal and every year you earn interest, but it's always based on just the original principal. So if we were investing, this wouldn't be great because we wouldn't earn as much, but if we were borrowing money with simple interest, it would be nice because we wouldn't have to pay as much interest. Contrast that to a compound interest, where we, again, over time, an investment could really grow because interest earns interest. If you look at the example, I know all of you probably remember the basics of principal times interest rate times time. With the compounding, it's principal plus all accumulated interest from the past times the interest rate times time. So our example here of putting $1,000, investing it at 10% for 2 years, you would add up to $210 with compound interest. With simple interest, you would add up to $200. It's a small difference, but over time, you will see certainly a big enough difference. Then I gave just a brief example of with a semi-annual every 6 months, which would give you a slightly larger figure than if you compound it, accumulate the interest once a year. So the frequency of compounding and the length of time and the interest rate, all that has an impact. We'll look at future value as well as present value. Single sum, what we're looking there is one amount for example, future value. If you invest one amount today, so what are you investing in the present? So that's the PV. Present value is the item going in now times the interest and so forth, yields a certain amount in the future. And so this formula here, if you remember, because interest earns interest, if you go back to the previous slide, well, I show it here too, it's because it's not simple interest, it's compound interest. Whatever you earn the next period is the principal and the interest from the previous. And so this is the formula that we deal with. We will use this in a little bit. We'll look at the equations. I don't expect, of course, everybody to memorize those, but you could figure out what you need. But a common thing that you'll find in textbooks and so forth, sort of a low-tech way, is to take the formula for, in this case, future value, and plug in, for your example, the number of periods and the interest rate. So, if you know it's 3 periods and 4% interest, then you can actually create a factor or a number. And then once you have that, you can quickly calculate a future value by taking your principal amount, or present value I should say, times the factor equals the future value. So this is just simply another way of calculating that as a variation of the equation. And with present value, we're looking at something in the future. What is it worth to us today? Where in the future value, you're looking at something in the present. What is it worth into the future? And so we do have obviously a different formula for this. We'll again look at the equation from the standpoint of a factor. We'll do calculations 3 different ways. One of them will be using that factor table, which should be in most textbooks. Okay, there are some differences between annuities that are ordinary and annuities that are due. So if we look at present value, there's a very set format for that. We're saying, what is it worth today in the present to receive future rents? I'm calling these R's rents, which could be deposits or withdrawals, and that's why rent's kind of a nice generic to use. So this is PVOA, present value ordinary annuity, and then this over here is present value of annuity due. Very similar. Same number of rents for both, but the big question is, if you look in the present, the very start of the problem, when does that first rent occur? So if the problem starts and 1 period later the first rent happens, that's end of the first period, and that makes it an ordinary annuity. If the problem starts and the first rent happens right away, then this is considered the beginning of the first period, and that's considered an annuity due. You can probably see that the main difference really is not the number of rents, obviously, but the number of interest periods that you have. So this one's got what? 1, 2, 3, 4. With this example, this one only has 3. So, it's a slightly different amount to deal with that. This one you don't have to put in quite as much because you've got an extra period to earn interest. So we just need to be sure we distinguish between the two. And once again, we will look at the equation, convert it to a factor, and solve the problem that way, as well as with Excel and with a calculator. Oops. Whoa, what happened to my... Okay, future value. I must have hit the wrong button. Future value, same deal. Ordinary annuity versus annuity due. The diagram kind of gives you an idea of what to expect. The single sum is in the future for future value problems. Annuity as well as future value of 1. In the present value problem we just saw, the single sum or lump sum is in the present, whether you're solving for it or you know it. So what is the difference again between future value ordinary annuity, future value annuity due? Not a whole lot again. You can tell by looking in the future of the problem. In the case of the ordinary annuity, the problem ends right when the last rent goes in, or comes, basically is recorded. So it's considered to be beginning of the period, but the way the problem is, and I probably Yeah, I guess, I'm sorry. For ordinary annuity, it's end of the period. I said that wrong. The problem starts one period later, the rents come, and sometimes it's hard to tell at the beginning of the problem what it is. So it's easier to tell a future value annuity problem by looking at when the problem ends. Last rent goes in. If that's when they're asking you what's there as the future value, then it is an ordinary annuity because we consider the rent coming in at the end of that last period. Where if it's annuity due, you have one full period after the last rent goes in before you're asked what's the future value. So this one I guess has an extra period to earn, so I think the annuity due, if I remember right, is a little bit higher than the total for future value ordinary annuity. Okay, and then of course present value we just did, I thought. But again, single sum in the present, single sum in the present, so that's a way you can identify. So let's go ahead and take a look at our example, and hopefully I can muddle through. I've tried to set this up as best, hopefully is something you could actually follow along, but what I basically do have here is 10 examples. And whoops, I forgot to take that out. Little problems that we have, the last two problems being the most difficult. And the green here I'm going to use for the factor table. We're going to create the factor because we actually have a formula. So for example, future value of 1, if I click on that, you look at the top, that's the formula for future value of 1, which is this that we saw before, 1 plus interest rate raised to the nth power. So what I've done is basically set up the formulas for future value of 1, ordinary annuity, annuity due, and then the present value of 1, present value ordinary annuity, present value annuity due. And we'll just plug in the interest and the number of periods, and then we'll create that factor. And if if you're not sure what the factor table is, here's one that I came across, where again it's just the equation up here, and they substitute like 1%, 1 period. That would be your factor. So this particular one has future value, present value of 1, ordinary, annuity due, and so forth. So usually you can have the whole gamut. I have another, you can find them in many places. Okay, and of course time value of money is used in finance, accounting, engineering, insurance, all kinds, I guess, actuarials, calculations, and so forth. Okay, so let me maybe not talk so much about what's here, and we'll just start. How about that? Okay, so we're going to use the factor first. First of all, before we do anything, we got to figure out what type of problem we have. So here we have your company saved $80,000 by year end, invested that money at 4%, and it's a one-time deal. They don't expect to get this extra money any other time. 10 years from now, they want to renovate the building. If they would like to spend $200,000 to renovate, how much will they have in savings to lessen the borrowing? So you're putting in the $80,000, investing at 4%, leaving it there for 10 years, and hopefully it grows. Again, we're using compound interest. So what type of problem do we have if you look at your choices? It's building up. It's going to, the single sum or one unique sum is in the future, right? We put the 80,000 in, we know that, we leave it there. So the 80,000 is in the present, so that's the present value. And 10 years from now, we need to figure out the future value. It's a one-time deposit though. It's not an annuity type problem. So future value of 1 sounds like a good choice. And let's do it this way. Let's go ahead and fill in the variables. We're going to use this with the calculator, but we can also have one place all the data. So n in this case is the number of periods. It says 10 years somewhere here. So we're going to assume a period is 1 year, and we have n equals 10. The interest rate is given at 4%. And let's see. We don't have anything with a payment. A payment would only come about, the PMT, if you have an annuity type problem. So there have to be multiple rents or withdrawals, deposits, whatever. We are going to solve for the future value of this. So I'm going to just put solve next to FV. PV is what we have in the present, so it's $80,000 is what we have in the present. I'm not really going to use Excel and be efficient. I just want to kind of show the numbers to give you the background. The first problem, number one here, is standing for this first problem. So it is a future value of one problem. The interest rate is 4%. Oh, actually, let me just type it in. I think it's easier. And then it shows better. Again, if I link things and I change something, it can go crazy. Okay, so 4% at 10. Again, this is just the equation, so what we're really seeing is that we're substituting the number of periods and the interest rate into your basic future value of one equation. So what I'm going to do, if I can keep it from messing up, is that's what we're talking about here is a little formula. So we're going to say present value times the factor that we have over there on the right, and I'll copy it in a minute into the left side, equals the future value. Okay, so the present value is the 80,000. I'm just going to type it in. And then your factor, it's a little harder to type in, so I'm just going to copy and paste it from here. So I'm going to copy, click, and paste it as a number. And shoot, there it is. Okay. Hopefully that's the same thing. Okay, so then the future value, I'll just do a little quick calculation. 80,000 times this table factor should give me one way to get the answer. So if you put $80,000 in, 4% interest, leave it there 10 years, it should equal about $118,500 roughly. So that's one way to solve for this. If you're going to use Excel and it has anything to do with future value, chances are you're using the FV function or future value function. So I'm going to come over here with the purple and I'm going to click on the FX at the top, or there's lots of ways to get into the formula. That's one way. And I'm going to look for FV. It's under the financial functions, but you can just type in FV and hit go. And I'll put OK. And then you have a pop-up and you need to put in your data. So, and I guess with the rate you put in the percentage. So I'm going to put in 4%, or you've got to type in 0.04. And then the number of periods is 10. We don't have payment again because it's not an annuity problem. And present value is the amount that we're investing. And type is only appropriate for annuity, whether it's beginning of the period or end of the period. So that we don't need to worry about. And I'm going to hit OK. If your number comes out negative, don't worry about it. The inflows and the outflows, I guess, I could have put the number in negative, I guess the 80,000. But anyway, it's the same result. And then let me pop up the, this is a great little TI Smart View. It's a great little way of demonstrating it. Oops, what I forgot to do. The last time I didn't set everything equal to 0. So let me just quickly do that. Actually, let me show you the way to do this. Let me clear it or whatever. Let's see. So usually if you're coming into this to begin with, I guess I could turn it off too. Let me do it off and turn it back on. Maybe I shouldn't try that too hard. Let's see. We do apps. And you can see finance is the first one. That's the one you want. So you hit enter. And if it's not where you want it, you can scroll it up and down with the arrows. But you do want the TVM solver. It's a great thing. I love this. It's so much nicer than some of the other older calculators. So much easier to use. So of course you can recognize N for the number of periods, I percentage is interest obviously, PV, present value, PMT payment, FV future value. And for some reason, let me go back through here. Thought I'd made them all 0, but obviously not. So make that last one 0. Okay. All right, so to solve this, number of periods is 10, so we could just type that in. Arrow down to interest rate, which is 4. I can type in the keys here. Present value, you are going to enter 80,000. I'll type it in. Payment doesn't apply. Future value is what you are solving. So when I find what I'm solving for, I'm going to do, To solve, you can see it's in the green here, so you hit the alpha and then the enter. And this is going to come out negative. It's that same inflow, outflow. It doesn't matter, just, it's the absolute value of it. So there you go, 3 different ways to come up with future value of 1. Okay, so let's go on to the next problem. Here we have, you need 30,000 in 3 years to train your staff. What amount of money do we need to invest today, earning 2% each year to generate the $30,000? What type of problem we have? We know what we need in the future. What is it? What do we have to put in today? Single sum in the future, single sum today. So this one sounds very much, and I never did label up here, did I? Future value of 1. This one's going to be the opposite, present value of 1. And so we'll take our present value times the factor. Future value times the factor equals present value. So it's just the opposite of what we did up there for the first problem. Your future value is 30, so I'm just going to type it in. We're going to figure out the factor by coming over here to PV of 1. We flip down here. Here's PV of 1. And let's see. Your interest rate. Let's enter all that first. Okay, so number of periods is 3. The interest rate that we are given is 2%. Whoops, what did I do there? 3, 2%. Present value we're going to solve for. Payment, again, is not relevant. It's not an annuity type problem. And future value we do know, which is the 30. Okay. So we have present value of 1. So if I find present value of 1 right here, the interest rate is 2%. We would type in as 2%, and then n equals 3 for the number of periods. Okay, so that gives us a factor under number 2. Okay, and I'm just going to cut and paste it over. It's too much to type in. So copy and then paste. And I'll do it not as a formula but as a number. Okay, so if I do the math, I'll take my future value times the factor. And since I'm using the present value of 1 table, I get the present value equal to 28,000 some dollars. So if I put 28,000 in and leave it there 3 years, it's going to generate 30,000. It's not a huge difference, but it's only 2% interest, and it's a short period of time. As far as the Excel goes, I'm going to be using present value. Okay, so I'll hit my FX, PV, okay, and you can see the same kind of process here. We're going to use interest rate is, again, put the percentage with it, 2%, number of periods is 3. Whoops, I'll just go ahead and type 3 in. Payment is irrelevant because it's not annuity. Future value is 30. And again, type doesn't matter unless it's an annuity. That has to do with beginning or end of the period. And I'm just going to put a negative sign here to make it a positive number. Also, you could use the absolute value. Okay, then I'll pop up the calculator one, we can do it that way as well. Once again, I guess I need to clear everything real quickly. So I'll just simply go through and make everything 0, at least through future value. Leave the last three. One of them is the payments per period per year, compounding per year, and then whether the payment occurs at the beginning or ending of the period for annuities. Okay, so let's go back up. We have what? 3 is the period, so I'll type in, click on 3. The interest rate is 2%. Here we don't show a percentage, just 2. And the PV will solve for, we'll come back to that. Payment is irrelevant, so I'll leave it at 0, and then I'll type in 30. Okay, then I need to come back up to present value, and I'll do alpha and enter. Okay, again, it's come up negative, but just make it the absolute value. Okay, so there's that. And then moving right along, our company plans on purchasing a business vehicle at the beginning of this year. We can afford to pay $5,000 annually. At the end of each year, we consider a loan period of 10 years. If the bank charges 5%, how much can ABC borrow? Okay, let's think about what type of problem we have this time. They can afford to pay $5,000 annually at the end of each year, and there's a 10-year period. Okay, so the question, it sounds like an annuity problem. There's a $5,000 annually, definitely same amount, that's an annuity. Interest rate, of course, is given. How much can we borrow? So if we borrow, we're borrowing right away and then paying it back. So we're borrowing it in the present. The single sum or lump sum is in the present. So if you think about it, and a lot of times if you're not sure, it probably is a present value problem. So it says end of the period, I think. They pay the $5,000 at the end of the period. So it kind of looks like you borrow the money in the present, and then you pay it back 1 year later and then over the time. So present value of an ordinary annuity sounds like what this one particular one is. So there's, yeah. Okay. I'm gonna pause. Okay, so we are looking right at coming up here with the third problem, and we are determined that it's end of the period, it's an annuity, and if we're borrowing it right away, the single sum is in the present, so it's a present value of an ordinary annuity. Let's put all the stuff, gather all the data together, and then we'll use it as we need with the 3 different ways. So the number of periods appears to be 10. They're annual periods. The interest rate is given at 5%. Present value is what we are going to solve for. This time the payment does apply. We do have that annuity thing, so we have $5,000 each period. And future value, there's no end result that will happen after we make all the payments and then we'll have fully paid off. So future value is really not relevant, and I'll just put a 0 there. Okay. All right, so now we'll go ahead and do first the factors. So let me put down the little formula that goes with this. So we have what? A rent. I'll put R for rent. The amount of the rent times the factor from the present value ordinary annuity equals PVOA. Rent times factor equals present value of ordinary annuity. The rent happens to be $5,000, so I'll type that in. The factor we need to figure out. So if I come here to present value ordinary annuity, and I'll put in 5%, whoops, not like that, 5% and 10 periods. Okay, then that should give me a factor. Okay, so I will cut and paste the factor over carefully. Too many numbers actually. So copy and paste. Nice feature to use, or at least for me it is. Okay, and then we can figure out present value. I'll just take that out now. So with the factor table, it's simply the rent, the annuity type part, times the simplified equation. And so we're getting $38,608 is the amount that we could borrow and pay over 10 years, $5,000 at 5%. If so, we next, so I'll put PVOA. For the built-in Excel function, we want to use present value. It kind of does all the present value calculations. So I will click on FX, find PV and hit OK, and then put in the data that we need. So the interest rate is 5%. Again, type in the percentage, or 0.05. The number of periods is 10. Payment is 5. There is no future value. And the payments happen at the end of the period. So if you look at type, you can leave it blank if it's the end of the period, because that's the default, or you can type in 0. Beginning of the period, you have to type in 1, so I'm just going to leave it blank. Once again, it's negative, so use absolute value, or just do what I do. Type in a negative in front. It's a quick way. And then last but not least, we'll kick up our little calculator and do it that way as well. But first I need to make everything 0. Okay, so this time I do want the payment at the end of the period. So I'm going to leave that as a setting there, and the compounding, the PYCY, is fine. So I can type in 10 periods, and the interest rate is 5. PV is what we're solving for. Payment is 5,000. Okay, and then future value is 0. There's no future value. So if I come back up here, then I'm going to solve for present value. So alpha and then enter. Okay, it ties all back, but it's a negative. Again, don't worry about the negative part. Okay, good. Alright, so next let's go on to number 4. Here we have a little different kind of problem. You're given choices. You borrowed money, $150,000, and there's 3 ways you can pay it off. We do assume 6% interest. So we can either pay $190,000 immediately, or we can pay, at the first case, $60,000 at the beginning of each year for 4 years. Or in part B, we can pay $200,000 total and just wait 3 years to do that. So let's take case A. Pay $60,000 at the beginning of the next 4 years. So it definitely sounds like an annuity because it's the same amount. Beginning of the period seems like it should be the annuity due type of thing, but you can always double check that. So the only question is it a present value or a future value problem? You're trying to compare these options, and sometimes you can go either way, but usually you want to compare them in today's situation, particularly since in part C we have one that's already in terms of today. So rather than bring it out to the future, do a present value ordinary annuity. So this is number 4. I'm sorry, annuity due. It's the beginning of the period, we said. I was trying to give you some variety, so we're going to use this in a minute to figure out the factor. But let's gather our data. So the number of periods for just part A, pay $60,000 at the beginning of the next 4 years. So each time you make a payment, that's a period. So n equals 4. The interest rate is 6%, so I'll put I equals 6. Present value is what we're solving. I put PVAD That's what this first part is, present value annuity due. So I'll put solve, and then the payment was given at 60. Glad we don't have to make that kind of a payment yearly. And the future value doesn't apply. So I'll put 0. Okay, so our formula with the factor table is simply taking the rent. Anytime you have an annuity thing, it's rent times the appropriate factor. In this case, equals PVAD, present value present value annuity due. So the rent, in this case, the individual amounts that makes it the annuity, is $60,000. The factor we're going to figure out right now by putting in 6% interest rate and 4 periods. Okay, so there's our factor. So I'm going to cut and paste it over. Copy and paste. Okay. And we can do our math. So rent times factor, 220,000. Okay, that's with the factor tables. Next, we're going to use the Excel built-in function. And of course, if it's anything to do with PV, present value, then we know we are using the PV function. So we find it, hit go, search, okay, and do our pop-up. And kind of, similar way, interest rate again is 6 and put the percentage. Number of periods is 4. Payment is 60. Future value, no. And this is at the beginning of the period, if I remember right. So we're going to make this a 1 for payment at the beginning. Makes it an annuity due. Okay, again, it's negative, but just do the absolute value for it. Okay, and then I'll pop up the demonstration for the TI-84. So once I set it all to 0, come back up to the top, the number of periods is 4. The interest rate is 6. Present value we'll come back to in a minute to solve. Payment is 60. And no future value. Okay, so we should be able to do present value alpha and enter. Oops. I knew sooner or later I'd hit one that wouldn't want to come out. What did I do? Something. Number of periods 4, 6%. 60,000. Oh, duh. I forgot to make it beginning of the period. The setting here is N, so that would be a present value ordinary annuity. Okay, so all I need to do, I guess, is come down here and scroll down with my arrow key to payment, scroll to the right, and hit enter. So now we're using beginning of the period, and then I'm going to come back up and make this, I guess, 0, and then solve for it again. So alpha, enter. Okay, so that looks better. So you can see there was a difference with the timing of the payments. Okay, negative again, ignore that part. Okay, so let's go on to part B, which said pay $200,000 in 3 years. Okay, $200,000 in 3 years, one sum in the future. So it sounds like what? Oh, I never put PV here too. 4B would simply be present value of 1. Single sum in the future, which then will also mean Excel will be present value. So we will be doing future value times the factor equals present value. Of course, the factor has to be from the present value of 1 table. Okay, let's gather our data. We have for part B 3 periods, Same interest rate. We are going to solve for present value. Future value is 200,000, one single sum. No payment, so I'm going to make that 0 or just leave it blank. Okay, so we'll solve for present value. Okay, so let's try first the factor table arrangement. Future value times factor equals present value, and we'll come over here to PV of 1. We'll find the next available spot. PV of 1 is right there, and we'll do interest rate is 6%, and number of periods is 4. Okay, so hopefully I'm doing all right with that, but you never know. Yeah, present value 4B, 6%, and that's what I did. The number of periods for part B. Oh, I keep going back and forth. I see what I did. It's 3 periods at 6% for part B. I was looking at the wrong one. So 4B should be 3 periods at 6%. Okay, which is the 0.8. Okay, that looks better. I was looking back to what I'd done earlier and it didn't look the same. Okay, 200,000 in 3 years. So the future value, if I can type that in right, the factor we just did, if I get it from the right place and do it carefully, so it's 4B, okay, which is present value, so I'll copy and paste it, and right in there, okay, and then we can solve for present value. So that times 300,000 times the factor gives me 251. Okay, this is 4B. And I keep making silly errors. It's 200,000 to be paid in 3 years. Okay, we'll get it right one of these days. Okay, so 167,000. To do the Excel function, I'm just going to click on Excel and do present value once again and pick up what I need. So it's 6%, 3 periods. Hopefully I'm looking at the right thing this time. Payment 0, future value 200,000. And it is the, well, it doesn't matter the type unless you have an annuity. Okay, so there's the number with Excel, making it positive. And then we'll do the calculator. So once again, we have to do the, I wish there was a quick way, then maybe there is. I don't use this calculator that much. But anyway, we can set everything to 0 and fill it in once again. So I have 3 periods, 6%. We're going to do solving for present value, no payment, and a future value of 200. Okay, we'll come up to present value, do alpha and enter, and we get the same number, which is a good thing because I don't want to look for any mistake. Okay, so next let's move on to problem number 5. Here we're planning on borrowing money on a bonds payable, 8-year bonds payable. We want to borrow $200,000. And in order to do so, we need to plan ahead and make sure we can pay it back. So we plan on setting up a sinking fund. If the fund is started at the beginning of the year when the bonds are issued with 8% interest, how much money would need to be deposited each year until the bonds mature? So it definitely sounds like the same deposit each time, which would make it an annuity. The the money's being deposited. The fund is started at the beginning of the year, then the money's deposited right away. That sounds like an annuity due. Then the question is it present value or future value? That's always tricky. But here, we want to set aside the money and it grows to the 200,000 in 8 years. And we take the 200,000 in 8 years and pay back the loan. So here I think you do want a future value for a sinking fund. So we're going to call this future value of an annuity due, since it's beginning of the period. Okay, so that would mean we'd have a rent times the factor equals future value annuity due. We'll gather again our data. We have 8-year bonds, and there's nothing to say, but we'll just assume it's annual, it's compounded once a year. The interest rate is given at 8%. We're going to solve for, no, we're not going to solve for present value. We are going to not have to worry about present value, I guess. Whoops. Make that 0. And we can look at the payment. They're asking how much do we have to put in to how much money would need to be deposited each year until the bonds mature. So we are actually going to solve for the payment this time. A little different. And the future value that we know we need to have is at 200,000. So you can have a future value problem, ordinary annuity due in this case, and know the future value. But the single sum or unique sum is off to the right in your diagram and is in the future. So it basically fits with this diagram where the rents go in, and then at sometime in the future we figure out the future. We add it up to the 200,000 future amount. Okay, so we're actually solving for the rents this time. How much money would need to be deposited each year? We can get the factor, so let's find the future value annuity due, which is up there, and we'll plug in and make sure I get the right stuff here. 8 and 8. That shouldn't be too hard, should it? I don't know. I can make anything hard. So there's 8, there's 8. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense. Okay, and so here we can do the rent is what we're solving for, but we know the factor, so I'm going to copy, cut, and paste this one in so I don't have to type it, and paste. Okay, and the future value annuity due, we also know what that is, so I'm going to stick it in there. We know that we have to have 200,000 at the end to pay back the bonds. So what we don't know is the R. So this one's a little different to deal with. I think I'm going to slip down here and basically say that if you're trying to figure out the rent, which would be the payment, and that's really what we're solving for, then if you look at this, if we simply do some algebra and simplify it, I would divide both sides by the 11.4876 to get R by itself, the rent. And so it becomes a division problem. It should be 200,000 divided by 11.4876. Whoops, I forgot to put an equal sign. Okay, so that gives us the deposit. So it's a little different process, and I'm just going to type this in. Actually, I guess I could have, let me just cut and paste it over here. I could have just put it in there to start with, which is fine. I'll put the color back in. Okay, and probably we can make this 2 places. I don't know why it took off like that. Let's just do a number. Yeah, there we go. Okay, so it appears that the rent the individual deposits we're going to have to make to this sinking fund needs to be $17,410 a year in some sense. Okay, so how would we then do it with the Excel formula? We're going to look for future value as we've done before. Doesn't matter what type of future value it is, that's usually what we pick up, and it pretty much is adaptable to everything. So let me make sure I'm looking at the right one. Okay, so we're going to do 8%, 8 periods. Payment, we're going to solve for, oops, we are solving for payment. So actually, I don't want to use this. This is one of the times where I'm solving for something different. There's a function called payment, and that's what I want to use. All right, so we'll try this again. FX, PMT, okay, here we go. And we have the interest rate is 8%, 8 periods. Let's see, present value, we're at 0, future value is 200,000. And it's an annuity due, so it's at the beginning of the period, so I do need to type in a 1. And cross your fingers. Okay. And make it an absolute value. Whoops. I always do that. Okay, so you should get the same result. Again, that's how much we have to deposit. And we can verify it one other way. We can do our good old calculator, which I really like. Whoops. Okay. So we'll simply enter the 8 and the 8. 8, 8, and present value will come back to, no, we're not solving for, present value is 0. Okay, payment will solve, future value is 200. Okay, so I'll go back to payment and just do alpha, enter for the solve. And you'll see again negative, but it's the same basic number. Lots of ways to do this. Okay, great. So we took care of the sinking fund. Let's scroll it on up to something different. So now we're going to look at number 6. The lease period is 3 years, the interest rate of 6%. If the car costs $30,000, how much should the monthly payments be? Assuming the payment is at the beginning of each month. Okay, makes sense. Often you make a payment, well, you don't have to, but it could be the beginning or ending. So the first payment's almost like a down payment. Okay, so what kind of problem do we have this time? Well, we make monthly payments. That's definitely an annuity type problem. The car costs $30,000. So we know what the car costs at the beginning. So this is really a good problem to figure out what would a person leasing a car out have to charge to make it worth their while and earn with 6%. So with $30,000 we know right away, and then the payments happen and happen and happen until it fully covers the car and earns you 6%. So we know $30,000 in the present. So that's going to be the present value of an annuity. The payments are at the beginning, it's an annuity due. So even though we know the present value, it is a present value annuity due problem, which sometimes is a little baffling, I know. But the single sum is in the present, so it's a present value problem. Okay, so PVAD, which means that it's an annuity problem would be a rent times the appropriate factor equals present value of annuity due. Okay, this time again let's see, we're solving for the actual rent, or the individual payments. So we're going to find PVAD, here's number 6, and let's gather our data first. Getting a little ahead of myself. So 3 periods, 6%. Present value we're going to solve for. Payments, actually, I'm sorry, the payment we're going to solve for. Present value is $30,000. That's the cost of the car. future value, we're not really going to have any future value because once you make all the payments, then it's done at the very end. Okay, so we start first with the factor table. Number 6, I'm going to put in 6% interest, I, and then number of periods would be 3. So it's a relatively short term for a lease, which isn't uncommon. And what did I do? Oh, I know what I did. Another duh. It's monthly payments. Hello, hello. Monthly payments are great, except I put in 3 years and 6% per year. So if you have frequent payments, you've got to compound more frequently, and we got to change this. So I think the easiest way for me to do this is to say 3 years times 12 months a year. It's really 36 months. We're going to convert everything to months. And 6% divided by 12, I won't do that, I know you can do that, or I'll do it. 6% divided by 12 is 50 cents per month. Or I'm sorry, half a percent. 0.5 is the interest rate per month. So I'm converting everything, the interest rate, to a lower amount per month, and then more total number of periods. Okay, so now maybe we make a little more sense. So over here, instead of that, I'm going to put 0.5%, or I guess it's 0.005, and then the periods is 36. Okay, that looks better. Okay, so now if I'm going to do this, it's going to be, I've got this filled in. We're going to solve for the period. So the factor, yeah, I can do that. So I can copy that over and simply move it into the box and paste it. Okay, what else do we know? We know the present value already. So I'm going to type in the 30,000. So we really are solving for the rent. We're solving for the monthly payment. So if we're going to do that, then I can put it actually right here, because if you solve for R, you'd be dividing both sides by 0.330354, and that would be divided, so that the rent would be $30,000 divided by the factor, or about $908.12. Okay, so that's one situation. We're going to once again use the payment function for the Excel. So I'm going to click on that, find the payment function, and plug in our numbers. So the rate is 0.5%, number of periods 36, present value, cost of the car, no future value, beginning of the period, so I'm going to type in 1 for the type, and then OK. Okay, again, always negative on me, but that's okay. Make it positive, absolute value, and then we'll pop up the calculator as one other way to get, hopefully, the same thing. It's always nice to have it confirmed, though sometimes I do these and I don't get much confirmation. Okay, so N, as we know, is 36, and the interest rate is 0.5. Make sure you get the point in there. Present value is 30. Payments, what we're solving for, future value is 0. So now I can do alpha and enter next to payment. Okay, there's the same number, once again, negative. Okay, maybe what I should do right now is go ahead and make that work. Okay. Okay, good. So now we're into number 7. Got a few more problems. ABC deposits one sum of $15,000 in a fund that earns 5%. How many years will it take the fund to double? Okay, if we double 15,000, obviously we get 30,000. So we know a number in the present, we know a number in the future, and we know the interest rate. So this could actually be handled more than one way, but I'm going to do it as simply a future value of 1. FV of 1. So what's present value times the factor equals a future value. And so all we need to do is plug in everything we know. We don't have all the information to do the factor. We would need, well, more than just the 5%. So there's a couple ways I could approach this, but present value is 15,000. We know that, so I'll substitute everything we know. Future value is 30,000. And then the factor, well, we can solve for the factor first and go from there. So the factor would be what? 30,000, right? If you'd have to divide both sides by 15,000. So it's 30,000 divided by 15, and it's no surprise that would be 2 or 2.000. Okay, so keep that in mind. So there's a couple ways I can approach this, because I really do need to know the factor to figure out the number of periods this way. This is almost a little harder with the factor table on this one. So it's a future value of 1 problem, so I need to find the future value, which is up here. And what I can do is I can plug in what I know, which in this one is I do know 5%. Okay, so I can come up here and if you had this set up, you could plug in 5%. Whoops, not like that. And then I could just keep plugging in until I get 2. So for example, if it's 5 periods, I have 1.2. I'll show you another way to do this if you have the whole table. 10 periods, and I know this should be 2, so it's moving up, but it's not there yet. So how about 12? 1.7, not quite. 15, too much. 15 periods or 15 years is too much. So now I'm going to drop back to 14. And it's not quite. So if you keep trial and error, basically, it's about 14. I know it's a little over 14. So it's a little over 14 years. The other way you can do it is go back to your chart and find your appropriate table, which is future value of 1. And simply look. Let's see, this is future value of 1. We know 5%, so you keep going down through here until you find something close to 2, and then come over this way and you see 15. So a little under is 14 periods, a little under 2, a little over is 15. So we could do interpolation, but we're not. To figure out it's close to 15 or 14. So that's another way to get there with the problem, in case you don't have it set up as an equation like this. Okay, so we have that to deal with, and so that told me 14.21 what years it'll take before the fund doubles, which seems like a lot of years, but anyway. Hopefully I didn't make a mistake. And then here we have a different one too. It's called NPER, which deals with the Excel function number of periods. So I can do the FX. This time type in NPER or look for NPER. And then OK. And plug in what I know. Now I think, did I not? Yeah, I should have gathered my facts. All right, let's do this. Let's close that for a minute and let me put the facts, the data down, which I didn't do. So the number of periods is what we're going to solve for, and the interest rate is 5. Present value is 15. Future value is 30. And Payment is not relevant for this because it's not an annuity problem. Single sum to single sum. Okay, now let's try it again. Okay, so NPER, and we'll put in the rate of 5%, payment 0, present value 15,000, future value 30,000, and type is not appropriate again without an annuity. And this happened to me before, and let me, if we come up here, let me just show something. If you have to enter two different numbers in your equation, you've got to make one of them negative. That's true also with your calculator. Let's see if this works. Yeah. It's inflows and outflows, and I guess that's the reason. So anyway, if you make one of them negative, I think this is true particularly when you're looking at periods you're solving for or the interest rate. You're typing a present value and a future value. You can't treat them the same. So make one of them negative, and hopefully you won't have any problem. And we'll do the same thing with the calculator. Number of periods we're solving for. So we'll fill in everything else. The interest rate is 5. The present value is 15. Payment's not relevant. Future value is 30. Oh, I just said to do it, and guess what I didn't do? What's new? All right, I think it doesn't matter. We'll see in a minute if it matters which one. Okay, so one's negative, one's positive. And we come back up to number of periods and do the alpha and enter. And we got 14.2, and it's very close. Okay, so that's good. And then let me go ahead and do that. Okay. Okay, so that's good. So now we're down to, let's say, number 8. Yeah, number 8. Okay, assume 4,000 is invested at the end of each year for 10 years and the fund builds up to 50,000 through 12. What interest rate is the fund earning? Okay, so a little different take on the question. We know the rents or the annuity part, the same amount each time. We know the future value. So the single sum is in the future. The items are going in at the end of the year, so it's end of the period ordinary annuity. Okay, so it looks like future value ordinary annuity. Again, it's building up to a lump sum, single sum, or unique sum in the future. So it's going to be rent times the factor equals future value ordinary annuity. Okay. And I should just be able to do, whoops, no, I can't just do. We are trying to figure out the interest rate. So we know the rents. I'll put in the 4,000. We do know the future value, 50,312. So once again, we're back to figuring out the factor. So we can simplify. Yeah, we're eventually going to figure out the interest rate. So I'm going to leave this open. Let's figure out the factor over here. Okay, so the factor, if again we simplify and solve for f, the factor, you're going to divide both sides by 4,000 to get the factor by itself. So it's going to be 50,312 divided by 4,000. Oops. Oh, it must, I know what it is. Wow, what made that happen? I must have hit a button. All right, try that. 50,000 divided by 4. Okay, that's better. Oh, I did that. Okay, so the factor is 12.6. Hopefully, or close to it. Okay, so what I can do is remember that and then go up to future value of an ordinary annuity. Let me fill in the data too, which I tend to forget here. What do I have so far? Well, I know the number of periods are 10. The interest rate is what we're solving for. Present value, not an issue, so I'll just put 0 for that. Payment is what we have, 4,000. Future value is the 50,312. Okay, so that should be accumulating everything that we need. Okay, so now we know the factor is 12.6 because we did the math, but what we're trying to do is figure out the interest rate. Okay, so what we do know is 10, so I'm going to come up here to FVOA. It's way up at the top, unfortunately. Okay. And yeah, so these things are getting a little further apart. It's a little harder to see. It's 10 periods, 12.6. So we could do a little bit of trial and error here. Yeah, future value ordinary annuity 10. I could type in 10. And then just try different interest rates. I don't know, 1%, 2%. See which way it's going. 3%. Okay, it's going up. It needs to be 12.6. I think is what we just said. This thing's got some program running in the background, fortunately. Yeah, 12.6. Okay. All right, so we're just going to keep plugging along. Its present value. Oh, I keep losing my spot. Yeah, so we're looking for the interest rate. Okay, so future value ordinary annuity. Come back up here. Okay, so if I make this 4%, all right, that's getting close. How about 5%? Okay, that's pretty darn close. Let's see, 5.5. Nope. Okay, 5%. 12.577. Okay, so that's close enough. So that one's a trial and error, like one of the other ones we did. Okay, so what I need to plug in then is 5%. Well, it just changed. It just dimmed on me. Okay, so this would be 5%. Okay, so that's one way to get it. For the FX, we actually have another one we can pick up which deals with the interest. And I am drawing a blank as to what it is. Darn! What is that thing called? And I thought I had it punched in there. Let's go up to FX. Rate. That makes sense, doesn't it? Okay. So we're solving for the rate. So we're going to put in 10 for the period. Payment is 4. Present value is 0. So we'll type in 0. Future value is 50,312. And we can leave that blank because it is ordinary annuity. Okay, so the one thing again, I've got two different numbers. I got to make one of them negative or it's going to give me some weird error message. So yeah, when you're solving for interest rate or you're solving for a number of periods, make one of your numbers negative, and even then it may not work. Okay, luckily it did work. So that's a good sign, and then we pop this up. It's going to be a very similar situation. We're going to put in 10. We're solving for interest rate, so we can scroll down. Present value, I'll make that the negative. How about that? Negative, actually I'm sorry, we're not going to make that one negative because it's 0. Payment I can make negative. So I'll do that and put in 4,000. And then next we can do future value, which is the 5312. And it is ordinary, so it's the end of the period. So I've got to come down here and move this over to end and then hit enter. So it'll stay there. Okay, and now I can scroll back up and solve for present. No, future value. I'm like, oh my gosh, it's too many numbers. We're actually solving for interest rate. That's why I'm on the wrong spot here. So there we go. So it's alpha and enter. And it's, you can see the 5, it's blinking. It's a little over 5%. Close enough, right? Okay. So we'll zero everything out. And we'll go on. And we got 2 more left. These are a little bit more involved, but we can handle it. We're almost there. This one's kind of a realistic problem. It says your client wants to have enough money saved to withdraw $6,000 a year when she reaches 65 to supplement her other retirement income. You estimate that she'll probably live 25 years in retirement, or that's, a reasonable period of time. She is 24 years old now, which is the perfect time to start saving for retirement. So the question is, how much money does she need to deposit at the end of each year, starting in her 24th year? If her last deposit will go in at age 64, and you're being conservative, are going to use 4% as your interest rate. So like, which is not a bad thing to look at it conservatively at a lower interest rate. So she's got 40 years, which is perfect with compounding of interest. Even with the conservative rate, she got 40 years to build up that money. So we really have a 2-part problem here. When she retires and she withdraws the money until it's completely gone, how much money do we need when she reaches 65, a lump sum, that then she can start drawing against until it's all gone? So that end, the retirement end, is really a present value problem. A lump sum in the present and so many future withdrawals. But when she's 24, she's putting money into a savings account and building it up to a future value that she needs later. So that's a future value annuity problem. Everything's at the end of the year. I think I set this one up. Yeah, so everything's an ordinary annuity. So what you want to do on this kind of a problem is work backwards. Start with the retirement period. So that's what we're going to do first. So this is going to be PVOA, present value ordinary annuity, which means that I have a rent times the appropriate factor equals PVOA for the factor table part. So we'll put the variables together for that. So the number of periods was 25 years of withdrawing. The interest rate we're assuming again is 4%. Present value is what we're solving for. How much money do we need when she hits 65 to allow her to withdraw $6,000 a year? The payment would be $6,000, and there is no future value. Once she's done this 25 times, there's no fund left. Okay, so if we take the rent, which is the payment, 6, the factor table, we have 25 and 4. So this is PVOA, 25 and 4. Here we go. So 4% with the percentage for I and 25 for the periods. Okay, so we've got 15, which I think seems like it's okay. Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to just cut and paste it over. Copy and paste. Okay. Oops, did I put it in the wrong? Yeah, I did. Darn it. Let me come down a little further here. It's the trouble once you start to scroll. It's hard to see it. Okay, I think we're right there. Yes. All right, let me try it. Hopefully I can paste it again. Okay. All right, so I should be able to figure this one out without too much ado. 6,000 times the factor of 15 point something. Okay, so what we're saying there is that with the assumptions we've made, she needs to have saved up $93,732 or $33 by the time she reaches 65 in order to accomplish the 6,000 withdrawal over 25 years. Okay, so that sort of is the first parter. So we need for Excel a present value calculation. So I'm going to hit present value, find PV or type it in, okay, and then put our stuff in. So it's 25 years with $6,000. Present value will solve. Future value. Oh, present value is, well, that's right, I'm solving for present value. And there is no future value. Oh, what am I doing? I hit rate? I didn't mean to hit rate. As I kept thinking, why is that? Okay, my fault. I just clicked on the wrong thing, I guess. Yep, I did. PV, okay. All right, try this. So the rate is 4%. The number of periods is 25. So again, we're just doing it a different way. 6,000 for the payment, no future value, and end of the period, so I don't have to change the type. Okay, so there's the same result, but negative. And then we'll pop up the calculator and hopefully accomplish the same thing. So the periods are 25, interest for present value, we'll solve for payment of 6, future value is 0. Okay, so if I scroll back up and do under present value alpha and enter for solve, I get the 93. Okay, so 3 ways all verify the same. Okay, so now that we know she's got to have 93,000 some dollars, how is she going to get there? The second part then is really a future value of ordinary annuity. So that means again our appropriate rent, the amount she's going to deposit times the factor equals future value of an ordinary annuity. Okay, what we do know is the future value coming from the first part, 93,732.48. We can figure out the factor for future value because we have what? Oh, we got to gather our data. So she has 40 years to generate this. 4% interest. The present value is, I guess, 0, right? We don't start with anything. Well, yeah. Yeah, 0. Okay, and so we know the future value is the 93, and I'm just going to round it to the nearest dollar. There's no point in having a cents. And then the payment is what we're solving for. Okay. So when I get there, I'll change that. Okay. All right, so we need the factor, 40 and 4, for future value ordinary annuity. 40 and 4. Future value ordinary annuity, 4%, I equals 4%, and N equals 40. Okay, so it should actually be a pretty large number there. So next I'll cut and paste it over. Yeah. Okay. So this is number 8. Okay, copy and paste. Did I do that from the right? It's future value. Okay. Alright, so it should be right there. And then paste. Okay, so the rent times the factor equals that figure. So the rent is what, again, we're solving for. So if I take, simplify this, it's 90, what? Rent equals 93,000 some dollars divided by the factor. $986 and probably some cents. I think it's, whoops, maybe rounding up. Let me double check that. 986.40. I think it's, yeah, this is just simply carrying it probably, yeah, it's just doing a general. Okay, so that really answers the question. How much does she have to save every year for 40 years in order to generate the $6,000 withdrawal each year or later? So there's the answer for that. For this one, we're looking at the, well, we're again, yeah, taking what we had from the first part. So we're going to look at the payments, I guess, PMT for the Excel. All right, PMT, and plug in everything we know as usual. 4%, 40, present value 0, whoops, future value 93,733, and the type, it's ordinary annuity, so I don't have to do anything. Okay, so that gives us that confirmation, and then if we pop up the calculator, ooh, and I didn't clear it, did I? There must be some way to automatically clear it, but I don't know what that is. Okay, 40, interest rate 4, present value 0, payment we're going to solve for, and future value we know. 93,733, go back up to payment. See how much easier the calculator, I think, is really a good way to go. Okay, so I can do alpha and solve. Well, alpha enter. So there's the $986.40. Okay, which confirms that. It's nice actually to have a confirmation. So it's a two-step problem, but we got there, thankfully. And then the last problem we're going to do is the cash proceeds from a bond. So what's the cash proceeds? When we issue the bond to start with, if the market rate of interest, what other bonds similar to ours are yielding with the same level of risk. If the interest rates have changed a little bit, then there's chances are there's going to be a slightly different amount of money we get. If you remember with bonds, unlike borrowing money from a bank, you don't know exactly how much cash you're going to get until you actually issue the bonds. Supply and demand, and other factors, change in interest rates can impact it. So in my first example, we have $300,000, which would mean usually 300 $1,000 bonds, maturity of 8 years. Stated interest rate just simply means 7% is stated on the face of the bond, and we're contractually obligated to pay it. We have 2 dates, which is common, a semi-annual for corporate bonds. Our 2 dates are July 1st and January 1st. That's going to make a difference when we look at the interest. Semi-annual, every 6 months. So I didn't want to deal with little partial interest rates. So in the first scenario, we're going to assume that the going rate of interest for bonds with similar risk right now is 8%. Our bond is dated at 7%. So if you think about investors, if you had a choice between buying 8% bonds, which are similar, or a 7% bond with the same level of risk, you jump on probably the 8% bond. So there's going to be less demand for our bond, which means the price is going to go down, and we will have a discount situation. Okay, so this one's more complicated as well. And when we do the factor table part, we really have a two-parter. We pay interest every 6 months, so that's the annuity part. And to figure out what we're going to get, we're going to do present value of annuity. So the only question is ordinary annuity due, and this is always true for bonds. We're paying 6 months later, so that's going to be end of the period, so it's going to be ordinary annuity. So we got to really break this problem into two parts. We're going to look at just the interest payments, and that's going to be present value ordinary annuity. And then in a minute we'll look at the maturity value, which we'll do present value of 1. That's why I've got two places here. So with the first scenario, we're going to have rent times the appropriate factor equals present value ordinary annuity, which will deal with the interest. So how do we figure out the rent or the payments? No matter what happens, we've promised to pay the 7%. So over here, principal times interest rate times time applies for this. Doesn't matter what the market rate of interest is. So your principal is 300,000 times the interest rate, which is what, 0.07 or 7%. And then the only other question is time. If you're making payments every 6 months, then you've got to compound it and record it. Your N is going to be 6 months. So it's 6 months divided by 12, because all interest rates usually are quoted as annual rates. So it's going to be really 3.5% paid every 6 months. So then if we just simply do the math, principal times interest rate times time, 10,500 is your interest amount, your rent. No matter what, doesn't matter again what the market rate of interest is. That's what you're obligated to pay. So the rent times the factor. The factor, this is one thing we have to try to keep straight. The amount of money you're going to receive with the factor here is based on the going rate of interest. So if it's 8% per year in scenario A, if you do it every 6 months, it's going to really be 4% every 6 months. So in 8 years, twice a year, so that's going to be 16 periods. The interest rate for a half a year is going to be 4. Again, that's got to be the market rate. Don't use the stated rate for this. And then your present value is what you're solving for. Your payment is the same thing as the rent. It's 10,005, which we calculated. And there is a future value. Let's see. No, we're doing this as two separate. What did I do? Okay, I was just putting it in the wrong spot. Okay, so you have present value of 1. Future value, you're going to have to pay back the 300,000 times the factor equals the present value. So what is that part of it worth in today's dollars? Going rate of interest will have to be, again, 4%, half of that. Okay, so yeah, so we have two things. Again, the annuity part is the interest. The single sum maturity value is the other part. And this is always, again, true for bonds. So let's get our factors. So we have 16 periods and 4%. So first I need PVOA. PVOA is right there. Good. So, yeah. Interest rate is 4%. I equals 4%. Periods is 16. Okay, so we've got 11 point something. Okay, so I'll cut and paste that factor over. Copy and paste. Okay, And we can do the math here. 10,005 times 11.6523. Okay, so that's the present value of the interest payments that you're making. That's what it's worth today. Pulling out the 4%, that's what the bond is worth for just the interest part. Now we'll deal with the single sum maturity amount that you have to pay, the principal portion. So that's going to be present value of 1, so 16 and 4. Okay, so present value of 1 is up here somewhere. There it is. Okay, so we have 4%, I equals 4%, and n equals 16. Okay, so there's the factor, which hopefully is okay. So I'll again cut and paste that over to that. Okay. So this is a little more complicated with the factor table for the bond. You have to kind of split it into two components, or at least that's the only way I've ever been able to figure it out. So does that look all right? So yeah, so now I need really is to add the two together. I'll put it over here. So I'll do well, I can just start typing in equals sum. And then just click on those. Okay, so 282,000 represents the total proceeds that we would get. So just again to make this more, hopefully a little more meaningful, it means that I'm receiving cash when I first issued the bonds of approximately 282,522. The face value of the bond is 300, so this is not good news for us. And therefore, to balance this entry, I need discount on bonds payable, which is a contra liability. We'll have this in a later chapter. So we have a shortfall, and this translates to extra cost, just because our interest rate didn't look as good as other similar bonds. Okay, so that's one way to do it. The other way is the FX. So we're going to use present value. And the good news is we can do it, I think, in one calculation, unlike the factor table. So PV, click OK, and then we'll go right down the list. We've got the rate is 4%. Again, be sure you use the market rate of interest for everything here. Semi-annual rate. Number of periods is 16. Payment is 10,005. Future value, here's where the future value comes in. Once we pay all the interest, we still have to pay back the principal. So that's where I can put 300,000 in here. And because I have, let's see, two numbers in here, I'm going to make one of them negative. I don't remember for sure. I think it will give you a problem if you don't. It is end of the period, so it's ordinary. I don't have to put anything there. So let's see what happens. Oops. Maybe that's not true. Let me take the negative out. Okay, apparently don't do negative with the present value. Only when you're solving interest rate and number of periods. Okay. All right, so for bonds, everything's positive, and that does check. And then if we pop up the calculator, very, very similar to the Excel, which is nice. So the periods are what? 16. The interest rate is 4. Present value, we're going to solve for. Payment, 10,005 is the interest payment. Future value is 300,000, right? That's the maturity. Yeah. So we again can do it in one thing, and then go back to PV and do alpha, enter. Whoops. Didn't I get back? I must not have. Okay. PV, alpha, enter. So there's the 282,000. Okay. So we got one more gyration and then we're done. I know you're glad. Okay. So the last one is if the market rate is 6% instead of, 6% or 3% every 6 months. So very similar. I'm going to fill in everything I know. PVOA with the factory, again, you have to split it, the two. 10,500, that never changes. And 300,000 separately. But obviously the factors will be different. So we have a different interest rate. Okay, so if we move ourselves up here, let me go ahead and put everything I know down here. 16 periods. This time we're going to have 3%, half of the 6%. We're going to solve for present value. If I can type it. Payment is 10,005 and future value is 300,000. I forgot to type it up here, didn't I? Okay, so the factor table you have to do 2 calculations. Excel and the calculator you can just do 1. Okay, but it's not that bad. Okay, so PVOA, and remember 16 and 3. I don't know if I can. Okay, here we go. 3% and 16. Okay, cut and paste that over. Copy and paste. Sorry. Okay, and we can do our math. Payment times factor. Okay, and yes, what else? 300,000, we need the factor for that. So PV of 1, 16 and 3. I find PV of 1 right there. Okay. 3% 16 periods. Okay, so again, I'll use that. Whoops, I think I did cut. Let me do that again. Copy, not that I guess it matters. And bring that all the way down. Okay, we can do that math. That times that. Add them together. Equals sum. Okay, this time, as you can imagine, we look favorable. Our interest rate is 7%. Others with similar risk are 6%. So we look like a hot item, and it's going to bid the price up. We can do the Excel function and find the PV. And once again, put in all our information. Always market rate of interest, 3%, period 16, payment 10,005, future values, maturity of 300,000, and type will automatically assume end of the period. Okay, so that part's nice. We can do it as one calculation. And last but not least, same deal with the calculator. We have 16, interest rate 3, present value, we're solving for payment, future value 300,000, and we scroll back up under PV and do alpha and enter. So we have 318,841. Okay, so just to finalize this, 318,000. $842 is the cash received for the situation where the market rate of interest is 6% and our stated rate is 7%. And the good news then is we have extra money we receive that we don't have to pay back. It's always a good situation. And it shouldn't be negative, but anyway, I'll be ABS. Okay. So hopefully we've done enough different examples that you've at least got the basics with this. I hope.